Ah, that's a clearer view of Mr. Vohra.
Kindly start, sir.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you all to an evening where we are really going to reflect on 60 years of the Indian Mountaineering Foundation. And the pretty immense contribution the organization has made for the cause of mountaineering and sparking indeed the spirit of adventure amongst the Indian people. It's also opened doors to many mountaineers from around the world to gain access into the Indian Himalaya and to explore and really to make it a must-do experience for any climber from any part of the world. So I thought this would be a great evening where we could reflect on the achievements and indeed some of the challenges that we might face ahead. And I guess as a climber who's spent more time in the mountains than in Delhi, I have with me a very star panel, and I'd love to invite Mr. Vohra, who is the chair of the evening, to make his initial comments. But before I do that, let me take a couple of minutes in introducing Mr. Vohra. Many of us will know that he is the president of the India International Center itself, but we've also had him as our president of the Indian Mountaineering Foundation for a grand 6 years between 1999 and 2005. He's an IAS officer, and I guess that's where his introduction to the outdoors began when he joined the Special Services Bureau. And not only that, but he trained with the SAS of UK, and he served in the Western Himalayan region, and which is how I caught him reminiscing about some of his early day treks in the Himachal area, especially Barabangahal and so on. He's also been the Home Secretary, the Defense Secretary, and later the Principal Secretary to our Prime Minister. He was the chairman of the National Task Force on Internal Security, and I guess something would have then led him to become a governor of a Himalayan state, which is Jammu and Kashmir, for almost 10 years. Mr. Vohra is the recipient of a Padma Vibhushan, and I know that he still holds mountains and mountaineering very close to his heart. So, Mr. Vohra, in the next 7-8 minutes, it would be wonderful to hear from you not just your role at the IMF, but how you've lent your shoulder to take the organization during your time to the next level, and what you think is where we stand at in terms of the whole idea of mountaineering and the spirit of adventure for our young people. So over to you, Mr. Vohra.
Thank you, Mandip. Thank you very much. My good old friend Ashok, Abbey, the president of the Indian Mountaineering Foundation, Rita Marwa, vice president, with whom I worked for several years when I was with the IMF as president. Prerna has just joined us. I haven't had the pleasure of meeting her, but Mandip was telling me about her great interest in climbing and adventure and doing things which were not done in our times.
Good evening, everyone.
Since Mandip has given me a few minutes to talk about, I would say that prior to the foundation of the IMF, the establishment of IMF, we had mountaineering in our hills, in our vast high altitude ranges. This mountaineering was of two kinds, put simplistically. One was pure climbing, trekking, adventure, and the other was guided by government. It was the part of the great game. When the British government had sponsored great climbers who were essentially climbers to become part of the game, to be able to contribute in terms of surveying unknown areas, finding out who's living there, what they're doing, what is the state of the ground situation there, and so on. This went on for a great great long period. And I would say that the contribution of these climbers from the late 18th, 19th century and first half of the 20th century was a great contribution. Mallory, Irwin, many of them unfortunately died on climbing these hills and our hills as well as the high mountain peaks elsewhere. Now, in 1953, when Hillary and Tendring climbed Everest, that was a great day, great moment for mountaineering. And it focused our national attention on our youth, our people. They got to know that there's Everest, and they got to know there are people who can climb 29,000 feet and above. And that kind of sparked both interest and imagination. In 1957, we had the government setting up the sponsoring committee. That's where government first came into the picture. This is for the Cho-Oyu expedition. And then that led the sponsoring committee graduated into a higher rank of the foundation, which was registered in 61. And then it took about almost 20 years for our building to come up. And I remember Prime Minister Indira Gandhi coming to inaugurate our complex, which you see today with the some additions. Now, after our foundation came up, and even before that, we had the beginnings of mountaineering, modern mountaineering, as you can say, in various parts of India. But I would say again, for simplistic reasons, I would say that it attributed modern climbing as we see today to Mr. Gurdial Singh of the Doon School, and later joined by one of his students, Jal, both of the Doon School. They did great pioneering work to introduce the youth, boys like Suman Dubey, who is now a distinguished mountaineer of some eminence. And this reared the first generation of trained mountaineers. Then, as it happened, as you all know, that 62, the Chinese aggression and warfare in the high mountain areas, that is what Mandip referred just now. I did several years of service in the Western Himalayas after the Chinese aggression. This conflict sparked off many consequences, one of which was how many of us are capable of working in the high altitude areas, much less fighting. And that led to the establishment of mountaineering institutions. And for good reason, these mountaineering institutions were under the coordination control of the Ministry of Defense. And that is where some of our first mountaineering leaders came, like Mr. Serene, Hari Serene. He was 17, 18, 20 years involved with the growth of the IMF. Then the first generation of Everesters, people like Monsing Kohli, the Navy man, he had along with almost a dozen people. That was an international world record for very many years. How many people climbed the Everest in one go? And then you all know that over a period of the last almost 60 years, slowly and slowly with the basic courses, high advanced courses, adventure courses and other courses, we produced several generations of boys and girls who were aware, who had the skill of climbing, the technical skills of climbing. Not all of them became climbers, but they had the skills, very useful. And this was a great contribution to the armed forces when they needed human beings to be enlisted, trained, and deployed in difficult areas where you have very low levels of oxygen. To be living there is difficult, to be breathing there is difficult, and to be living and fighting there or being fit for battle is far more difficult. Now, alongside mountaineering, with the period I was there and before me and the period after me, all my successors and Rita has been there for a long time. This climbing originally rock climbing, but then you had these artificial climbing places where you could, in the middle of a metropolitan city, do climbing for 20 minutes and go back to work. Now, this became very fashionable and very attractive in Europe. Then in Canada, then and I dare say America also, but Canada and Europe have been great devotees of the climbing, wall climbing competitions and training boys and girls in that. And we had great climbers from Europe in this arena of climbing. Now, of course, the large area of adventure you do in river rafting and whitewater and all that, and the people go on alpine trekkings and do various other things. Part of it is now being commercialized, as I was talking to Mandip in the morning, which in a way is very good that now in our vast country with our vast resources, vast opportunities, we have entrepreneurs like Mandip who have created the basic infrastructure for enabling both foreigners and Indians who have the interest as well as the resources to be able to go for 5 days, 10 days, 15 days, or 1 month to undertake various kinds of adventure or climbing or whatever. Now, I would say that IMF, looking back for this period that has gone by, I would say that IMF as an institution has made extremely valuable contribution to training youth who may or may not join the armed forces, but maybe elsewhere in the country, who have the confidence, the courage, the grit when they see a tall mountain and a peak which seems inaccessible, that they will just put on their gear and say that we'll climb it. This is part of character building in the larger sense. And the other part which Rita is aware of our struggles in the past days, government has, I'm not criticizing the government Ministry of Youth or Sports, but I say they are very niggardly when it comes to helping the IMF. Now, a building which was completed in 1980, as I just mentioned to you. Do you know, Mandip, that maybe Ashok knows, yeah, Ashok knows more than Mandip. Ashok spoke to me several times in the past few years that he's been there. Our building was not getting approved by the Delhi local authorities, which would enable us to make use of the land in a more optimum manner. So it took us from 1980 to 41 years to get, I don't know, Ashok, whether the approval has finally come. Should have come. So I would say that government in a country of 135 crore and with youth, that we have the largest component of youth in the world today. Youth of boys and girls of around 30, plus 30. The largest population segment in the world is youth in India. And they could do wonders given the opportunities as they are doing, even within limited opportunities. So I would say, not taking more time than Mandip has allotted me, that IMF has played a glorious role, and Ashok Abbey, as its current president, has made very valuable contribution to cleaning up some of the cobwebs which had unfortunately appeared, and then taking the institution forward. And I would close my remarks by saying that 60 years today is a great day, and to the president, to the vice president, and to all members of the IMF, I send them my greetings, my congratulations, and good wishes for a very bright future for the IMF in the years to come. Thank you, Mandip.
Thank you, Mr. Vohra. That was very well laid out. I think, it's a great cue for us to get in Ashok, who's our current president at the IMF, and request him for some of his thoughts for the next 5 minutes. But before I do that, let me introduce Ashok, and who's, of course, been a very experienced and a very well-respected mountaineer, skier. and a paratrooper to boot, who's been climbing passionately for the last several decades, I think over 4 decades, ever since he was a school kid. And he's led many international and national expeditions. And he's not only climbed in the Himalaya, but he's also climbed in the Karakoram. And he's also instructed at the Nehru Institute of Mountaineering, where he became the principal, as he was with the Jawahar Institute of Mountaineering and Winter Sports in Gulmarg. And I know because he wore his army pips quite well, I think he was asked to look after the high altitude warfare school as well. So he's a man with tremendous versatility. And he also took on the role of the president of the Himalayan Club, which is one of our oldest mountaineering clubs in the country. And needless to say that he was, of course, the recipient of the Tenzing Norgay National Adventure Award for Lifetime Achievement. So Ashok, over to you, and let's hear your thoughts on some of what maybe Mr. Vohra has highlighted, especially about why it took us so long to get the building approval. I don't want to be cheeky and say that maybe they got lethargic with the bureaucratic outlook, but tell us a lot more. And I know you've done a tremendous amount in the last 2 years. So over to you in the next 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mandip, for that introduction. Shri N. Vohra sir, Mandip, my co-panelist, Rita Gombu, and the young Priyana Dangi. Wonderful to be here today and speak to you as we celebrate 60 years of the Indian Mountaineering Foundation. Let me firstly begin by saying that mountaineering is the mother of all adventure activities. And although mountaineering started in the Alps, in the 18th century, in the 20th century, its real playground became the Himalaya, and that to the Indian Himalaya. And Himalayan climbing really took off. As you are aware, that the great game finished in 1907, and it's from there that the golden age of mountaineering is really started as far as the Himalayan range is concerned. And much of that history is completely synonymous with the Indian Himalaya. In 1907, Trishul was climbed, 1931, Comet was climbed in 1938, Nanda Devi was climbed. Of course, a lot of it was British driven. But after India got its independence, there was a spark, and this spark came in the form of the 1951 expedition to Trishul. And as rightly mentioned, Mr. Gurdyal Singh and Roy Greenwood, when they stood on top of Mount Trishul in 1951, little did they realize that they were unleashing a wave of, or I would say, several decades of mountaineers to come. The real beginning, as already brought out, was made in 1954 with the establishment of the first mountaineering institute in Darjeeling. And I would say that there was really no looking back. And as brought out by Vohra sir, that the 1957 sponsoring committee for Choyu expedition set the ball rolling. Choyu was climbed in 1958. In 1960, the sponsoring committee became the sponsoring committee for the first Indian Everest expedition. And in 1960, Indians were almost on top of Everest. And of course, the sponsoring committee again changed and became what is then called the sponsoring committee for mountaineering expeditions, basically to promote mountaineering at a national level. And subsequently, on 15 January 1961, the Indian Mountaineering Foundation was constituted in the shape that we see today. 60 years is a long time, and the IMF today stands as the apex national body for not only mountaineering, but also for trekking, sport climbing, and all adventure activities. Now, the primary role of mountaineering, as we all know today, is basically to promote, sustain, support, and nurture mountaineering. And mountaineering is the core activity of the foundation. And therefore, the IMF stands committed to promoting mountaineering, to nurturing mountaineering in its finest forms. The other important role of the IMF, as we are doing today, is also to promote the Indian Himalaya side by side. And as rightly brought out by you, that the idea is to lure foreigners to come and climb into India. And we have the best range. We have the best part of the Himalaya as part of our country, and which is absolutely fascinating and amazing. So the idea is to get foreigners here to see India, to climb here, and of course, the other benefit is that it brings a lot of economic development. It brings in a lot of economic prosperity to those who are involved in promoting this. The other very important role which is being played by the IMF today is regulation of mountaineering. IMF is the outhouse of the government of India, and all directions of the Ministry of Home Affairs and Ministry of Defense are actually, controlled by the IMF. In fact, regulated as far as mountaineers are concerned, to make sure that the security establishment rules and what is mandated of an expedition as laid down by the government of India are respected and completely followed. Apart from that, of course, IMF has been promoting both men and women to climb. A lot of joint expeditions have been launched. Training is something which is inherent. And of course, cleaning of the Himalaya, the environment, which actually is a core concern for the IMF today. But 60 years is a long time. In the 50s, 60s, and the 70s, climbing was different. 80s, 90s, it came, to a different level. And as Mr. Vohra brought out, that the change, has to be there, because we have to now look ahead. So there are challenges in this regard, and the biggest challenge, I think, for the IMF is to stay relevant to the present climbing environment. And what I mean is that today, because of rapid commercialization, climbers who are coming out from mountaineering institutes, they have something else in their mind. Whereas the IMF is committed to alleviating the national standards, and skill-based climbing is what the IMF stands for. And fortunately or unfortunately, the Indian youth are today swept, by the mountain call. I must share with you that in 2018, we had almost 117 Indian expeditions up in the hills. And even this year, in 2021, in the times of COVID, we've had almost about 67 Indian expeditions which have gone and climbed in this time. So mountaineering is in the blood, and it's up to now the IMF to actually channelize it and to make sure that skill-based climbing is very much there, and it shouldn't get lost into the so-called guided expedition. So a fine balance, of course, has to be there. The other important aspect which the IMF really needs to look at is preventing accidents in the Himalaya. This year, we've had a terrible, I'm sure you've been reading the papers, accident on Trishul, and there were almost about 12 trekkers who lost their lives. So we need to introspect, and along with all stakeholders, sit down and take stock of what is happening. In other words, look at search and rescue, look at means of communication, etc. Environment is a very important part, because if these mountains are to survive, and if we need to actually climb here, well, these mountains, of course, have to survive. And that's why the environment is the biggest factor which really comes in. So I would just like to say that the challenges are many, and the IMF at this juncture, has to look ahead and see as to what needs to be done. Of course, I must, thank Mr. Vohra, because, when we got into this land building, coming on to your specific question, Mandip, it's not easy to deal with such organizations. And we are, of course, fighting a major battle here, to still get our formal way ahead. So the other space, for construction of the new museum, which is being planned, etc., can go. On the whole, I would just like to say that, it's people like Mr. Vohra and the past presidents and members of the IMF and all the office bearers who have served over these 60 years, who have served this organization so dedicatedly, so commendably. Well, it is because of them that the organization like the IMF has been able to serve the mountaineers. And I have no doubt that this organization will continue to play a yeoman role in serving mountaineers, not only of the past, not only of the present, but also of the future. Thank you. Back to you.
Thanks, Ashok. That was very well put. And I think I want to harp on the fact that there is a great spirit of volunteerism, and in that small committee that you constituted to look at the vision and mission statements for the IMF, which I was part of, one thing that came through was the amount of voluntary service that people do. And I think that is one of the sort of main, pillars of mountaineering and teamwork and so on. And that is actually quite heartening, the way it is done at the IMF. So thanks for that. And I will now turn to our current Vice President, Rita Gombu. And let me introduce her, because this would also allow me to ask her to talk a little more about her personal journey and being a lady mountaineer, from the early sort of 80s when she got into it. Let me first start by saying that she is also the daughter of Nawang Gombu, who is, of course, a very well-respected and a well-known mountaineer who also climbed Everest twice. He was the only person to do it twice in his time. And I guess thanks to that DNA, Rita, you've led a pretty interesting expeditionary life, as I see with your schooling and growing up in Darjeeling and doing your college over there. But then you went on to Kabru Dome and Mount Rainier in 1982, and Mana and Everest in 83 and 84. And then, as if that was not enough, you went back to Kamet and Abbey in 91 and went on to climb to do Everest in 1993 as the deputy leader of the Indo-Nepalese women's expedition. So that was a good move. Now in 1997, she went off to the Siachen, and about 10 years later, I'm told that she went with her kids and went on to climb Kilimanjaro in Africa. So she's also one of the earliest recipients of the Tenzing Norgay National Adventure Award. And in all these years, while she's been clocking expeditions, she's actually been working for Air India, from which she retired after a great run of 35 years. So Rita, over to you, and tell us a little more about your journey with the IMF and the impact that it might have had on women climbing, for starters. Over to you.
Thank you, Mandip. Good evening, Mr. Vohra, Ashok, Prerna. Okay, my journey for mountaineering started in Darjeeling. I was born in a family of mountaineers, and I did my basic and advanced course. And then after that, the institute started its first adventure course for women, for girls, young girls, and there were no men, only men instructors. So we were the first women called there to become instructors. So we were the first female instructors to teach the adventure course. And later on, we also became instructors for the basic course. Then after completing my advanced course, the Indian Mountaineering Foundation, I'd like to say, has played a key role from the inception for promoting, supporting, sponsoring Himalayan expeditions. And so the Indian Mountaineering Foundation, you see, they decided that it was time. Actually, it was Mrs. Gandhi who had told them that it's time for a woman to climb Everest. So the Indian Mountaineering Foundation decided to have a Everest expedition, and it was a mixed expedition. But they also invited the women to participate, and that's how we had like these two pre-Everest expeditions, one in Garhwal and one in Darjeeling. And out of that, they selected the men and women. And finally, in 1983, we had an expedition to Mana in the Garhwal Himalayas, where we were about 60 members, 20 women and 40 men. And it was a very competitive expedition, and we had to compete with the men. And mountaineering is a sport which is basically your strength and stamina, and speed in the Himalayas. That's how they used to judge us. So we used to carry load and ferry load and go up and down the mountain. And based on our performance, finally they selected a team for Everest. And in 1984, the Indian expedition to Everest was launched, and we had 7 women climbers there. And on this expedition, Bachindri became the first Indian woman to climb Mount Everest. I was on the first summit team, but I missed the summit by 200 meters because of bad weather. And when you're climbing in the mountains, weather is very important. And anyway, I have no regrets. Now, I'd like to, focus on the role of Indian Mountaineering Foundation as far as climbing for women is concerned. Now, mountaineering initially, of course, was a male sport. And in 1954, when the HMI was formed after Tenzing climbed Everest, in 59, there was an international expedition for women who went to Choyu. So in 1959, there were no women climbers. So that time, Tenzing Norgay sent his 2 daughters and his niece to Choyu. That was 59. Then, in 1961, there was a lot of pressure from Indian women saying that we also should be allowed to do the mountaineering courses. So in 1961, the basic course for mountaineering for Indian women started. Then after that, in 1968, the Indian Mountaineering Foundation decided to send an expedition for women to Adi Kailash. And in this expedition, the leader was Nandini Pandya. She was Nandini Patel at that time. And all the girls summited the mountain. And Nandini Pandya later on became the first women principal of a mountaineering institute in Mount Abu, run by Gujarat Mountaineering Institute. Then in 1970, the Bombay Mountaineers decided to send an expedition to Trishul, led by Meena Agarwal. And in that expedition, Chandraprabha Agarwal became the first woman to climb Trishul. After Trishul, in 75, Junko Zabai had climbed Mount Everest, being the first woman to climb. So in 1976, there was an Indo-Japanese expedition that went to Abbey. And on that expedition also, we had Chandraprabha Agarwal and Titi Birdy, who is no more. And Nasu was a Japanese girl, and they were the first women to climb Abbey. So after the success of Abbey in 1977, the Indian Mountaineering Foundation decided to send a women's team to Kamet. Then on Kamet also, we had again Chandraprabha Agarwal. She was a good mountaineer. So she along with Titi Birdy and Bharti Banerjee climbed Kamet. So after Kamet, then in 1981, the Indian Mountaineering Foundation again sent a mixed expedition to Nanda Devi. And in Nanda Devi, Chandraprabha Agarwal, then Rekha Sharma and Harshpanti Bisht were the 3 women who climbed Nanda Devi, along with Natu Dorji, Sonam Paljar, and Ratan Singh. So now, after 1981, then, of course, like I said, they have decided now the ground is ready for an expedition to Everest, and Bachendri Pal climbed in 84. But after Bachendri climbed in 84, you see, I mean, the problem with the mountaineering is it's a male-dominated sport, and women did not seem to get credit for climbing the mountains. Because the general impression was that, we women climb and the men pull us up, which is a completely wrong notion. So, we decided that, Bachendri and me had decided that next time if we have to go climbing, we must take a women's team. So here also the IMF had a very key role to play. Initially, Captain Kohli was the president of IMF, and he wanted us to take a joint expedition with the Japanese. But for some reason, the Japanese women were not prepared to come on a venture with us. So we decided to send a women's team, and it was decided that why not have a joint venture with Nepal, have an Indo-Nepalese women's team, so that we don't have to pay the peak fees also. We opened the Nepalese girls, and the peak fee was waived off. So for this venture, what we did was all these years, the Indian Mountaineering Foundation had a key role in many aspects, right? But we wanted to do this purely based on our own. We decided among all the list of applicants, we scrutinized everybody, and then we selected some 35 women, and we took them in 1991 to Kamet and Abigamin, and then these girls climbed Abigamin. Then after that, we again took these girls to Momosang Kangri. Again, they climbed Momosang Kangri. And after that, we took the women's team to Nepal to Everest. Now we followed this basic principle where, we believe that all the women should ferry their load to a higher camp and come down. And then based on how many ferries you do, the simple fundamental was that you ferry a load and come down, you complete your ferry, you're fit to go up and shift camps. So in 1993, Everest was a very different scenario. It had just, the commercialization had just started. So unlike 84, in 93, Everest had like 12 international expeditions. And apart from the Koreans, we were also the only women's team. And we selected the girls based on their performance in the mountain also. And we were very successful. I mean, we had 7 girls who submitted Everest, and it was a successful venture. And after this expedition, you see, we also had 2 of our submitters from Manali, Diki Dolma, who was the youngest, and Radha, who actually, then became professional instructors on a permanent basis, and they are now at the moment teaching climbing in Manali. So the role of climbing did change slowly, and women started getting recognition. And then after 93, I mean, and in 2003, the 50th anniversary of the first Indian ascent, successful ascent to Everest, when Mr. Vohra was the president, I decided to take a team of girls to a virgin peak. So we went to this virgin peak in eastern Karakoram called Argan Kamri. And this peak, the year before that, in 2002, Harish Kapadia and Chris Bonington and all had gone, and I think due to bad weather, they didn't succeed. So in 2003, I took a team of 5 girls, and they were all very good climbers, and we managed to climb that mountain. So after that, today, currently, we have a lot of good climbers. But the point is that now in today's scenario, we are trying to encourage the Indian women. We have a lot of women mountaineers today. Priyana Dangi is here. Now we are trying to encourage these women to please climb in the Indian Himalayas. Because, I mean, climbing in Nepal is also, I mean, the challenge of your 8,000 meters is there. But you see, I mean, the satisfaction is not there, because no matter how hard you try, the people are skeptical, because, it's a commercial venture where you have Sherpas in front of you, behind you, carrying your load, giving you oxygen. So even if you climb a mountain, you don't get credit. This is for everybody. So, I mean, people are doing that to get awards and rewards, and we want to try to change that concept. And we want these girls to climb in India. So we do have a bunch of young climbers in India also who are doing that. Now we have girls like Pusi and Shanti Rai, very tough climbers, okay, who are climbing in India and who are trying to climb alpine style also. Shanti Rai, in fact, climbed Amadablam without oxygen also. And they are progressing and doing a much better job, I should say, than the men, because we don't have many male climbers who have gone without oxygen or a winter ascent. And for the record, I'm telling you that these women have achieved it. I mean,
okay.
This is
Rita,
so,
I may have to come in now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's very, very insightful, actually. And I'm sure, like we were chatting earlier with Ashok and Mr. Vohra had suggested, and so on, that, maybe at a future date, maybe this year, should have a lot of interesting debates and discussions on mountaineering and the challenges and so on. And perhaps we can do some physical events at the IIC as well. And I think there are obviously some fascinating subjects to focus on, whether it's rescue systems, whether it's environment, or the role of women, or indeed the commercial expeditions that are going, which is always in the beginning. And I see the point that both Mr. Vohra and Ashok made, that they were there to trigger the interest and shoehorn the people into adventure. But it was not for people really to cling on to, commercial expeditioning alone. So that, I think, is another challenge, but that's for another debate. Now let me move on to our last and youngest speaker, Priyana Dangi, and we'll try and get a perspective from her. But before I do that, Rita, in a lighthearted manner, so you would agree with me that the agenda for the IMF of gender neutrality was pretty good then. Anyhow, let me move to Prerna. And she's actually from my alma mater, St. Stephen's College, and she finished her literature undergrad in 2014. Now, being from the hills again of Uttarakhand, as I only discovered some time back, she was literally from the same village where we had a small mountain home. But she started climbing in St. Stephen's at an artificial rock wall that was constructed. And she's gone in leaps and bounds from there to become very proficient, not just in rock climbing, but also in ice climbing. And her slightly unusual not going the traditional path like a few of us have done in life in the world of mountaineering. She has gone on to Alaska to climb in the Scottish Highlands, Slovenia, Russia, and of course back in the Himalaya. She's also been the sort of founder or co-founder of Winter Ice Festival in Spiti. She is also actively involved in getting more women to climb through an organization called Climb Like a Woman. So it couldn't be more direct than that one. And of course, apart from her many rock routes and all, she's done some fascinating attempts of lines on peaks like Papsura. And she's also made a ascent of Denali, which is, of course, a pretty tough mountain, as we all know, in Alaska. And more importantly, as she writes in a bio, that it was an unguided ascent. Much of what we talked about recently, and then she's also been part of the Indian climbing team in the World Cup in 2016, and I'm so personally delighted that we've got a huge crop of great sport climbers coming up, and I was quite it was interesting that about in '94 I was asked by the IMF to be the first Indian sports climbing manager, where we took the first Indian team. And the good thing is we didn't come last because they had no experience, but we just wanted to expose them. So Prerna, give us your story. Tell us what the challenges lie for the future and what your generation is really thinking. I mean, surely we are going beyond siege tactics. Surely alpine style, lightweight, and all of these things are the need of the hour. So in your own words, for the next 5-6 minutes, please tell us.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for that introduction, Malisa, and very good evening to all present here. A happy birthday to IMF is how I will put it. So IMF has played quite a role in my climbing journey personally, because having started from the Stephens Wall, I needed to graduate to a bigger wall, a bigger place, a bigger community. And I think despite its, at that point, we would call it shabby, the shabbiness of the wall, we found a very tight community at the wall in IMF. And, these were just people who to whom climbing called the same way as it did for me. And I think that is one of the most important, aspects of bringing like-minded people together that climbing has. So from there on, I think the journey to get into competitive climbing was very organic for me. Everybody around me was doing that, so I ended up doing that. And because I was living in Delhi, it was something that the wall was easily accessible, and access, as we all know, plays a huge role in anybody's climbing journey. So I think having competed, I mean, I think what I would like to start by saying is that from my perspective, having seen the IMF as the apex body for mountaineering and been in the industry, in competitions, in outdoors, and in the professional aspect of it when it comes to guiding, etc. I feel maybe what I would, or and like my peers would like to see is a change in the narrative of climbing as we see it in India, because I think even as Brigadier Abbey spoke, and Vohra sir said, and Rita ma'am said, I think combining all of these three things, where there is enough potential in India, there are people who have the vision, who want to climb outside of the box, outside of what is the norm, which happens to be the big mountains and happen to be outside of India in Nepal. There is enough of a pool of very driven people, very driven climbers who regardless of the obstacles, are on their journeys. I just feel that imagine what would happen if they were to get the kind of support that could, unshackle the obstacles for them and what heights they could take Indian climbing to. And I think that it's all right to be on a personal, uh, to have climbing ambitions that are personal first, and then they can be about anything else. But if we support those personal ambitions, those little contributions will make a very valuable pool of history of climbs for us. Because when we look back to trips that we can that aspire us, that inspire us. I know from reading in the Miscellany, the hiking club um, magazine, about the Mulkila expedition that St. Stephen's Hiking Club went on, and these are peaks that I would never know of if it weren't for these people who were a little hatke, and some of our pioneers were, and they still stand to be extremely inspiring when it comes to dreaming about the mountains. So I feel that recognizing that there is that vision in young climbing aspirants, and so finding ways to support it better is definitely one of the ways we want to incorporate in the future, which can come in various ways, such as opening, like creating more awareness about the peaks that are open, not giving so much importance to how high the mountains are, but what route are you taking up the mountain? Because as we all know, the mountains test us, regardless of how high they are. There's weather that plays such a big role. And I think that if we stop looking at climbing achievements as achievements, but look at them as efforts, how good was your effort? How hard did the mountain test you? That might also help change this narrative, because we don't want to. Mountaineering is not a race. We go up, go on an expedition, we come back, and people ask, "Summit hua?" But now we don't care if summit hua ki nahi hua. We want to know, what route did you take up? Did you have only 3 ice screws? Wow, how did you manage that way? And it's really, I think we're also hyper aware of what's happening in the international market, of the standard, sorry, not the market, the industry, and of the standard of climbing and of guiding. A couple of my friends I know are chasing the IFMGA badge, which is the highest honor for a mountain guide in the establishment, and they're doing it through Nepal, which has now been allowed to give training as to non-accredited IFMGA nations, which currently India isn't accredited to be in the IFMGA league yet, but there's enough mountain guides who can put the work down to create a community like that. And it's obviously not something that will happen in a jiffy. We must work towards it slowly and eventually. But as the apex body, the IMF can play an instrumental role in taking that forward. And we all want, so many of us I know want that badge of honor, to be able to guide at that level where you have to climb Amma Dablam to qualify as an aspirant guide. So we know how high the standard is set, and we want to dare to aspire for that standard. So this is a great window of opportunity for us with the things opening up in Nepal. We no longer have to, travel all the way to US or to France, which is much harder for us as Indians. Um, Another thing that I see a disconnect in is where the IMF, which is the affiliate body for the IFSC Sport Climbing Olympics Committee, and despite that, we don't yet have a dedicated sport climbing association of sorts. And uh, from my personal experience of having competed nationally and internationally, uh, I know that there's so much where we can, with just a little more effort, put things together. And there are people who want to work for this community. There are athletes who have been dedicatedly climbing for years. And I feel like, honestly, they see the IMF is considered old school from my generation perspective. So they think that, okay, we just go around it. because it just takes too much longer to go through it sometimes. And that tends to be the attitude a lot of times. But maybe it's because of, I don't know, but I feel like there is enough dedication in climbers to really pursue and to aim and aspire for the Olympic level. So it for me now I no longer compete, but I regularly climb with and meet my fellow peers, younger climbers who are climbing at par with the international standards, yet they cannot go and compete at that same stage. And I think bridging the gap there somewhere, I think the IMF, if the IMF steps up, it would be a great boost because mountaineering is rock climbing, is bouldering, is strat climbing, is ice climbing. It's, I think it's nothing without all of these things combined. And that's where
Okay.
I end.
Super, Prerna, and thanks for highlighting some of the really important aspects, which I again think very strongly that these are all aspects that we should be vociferously debating about, and bringing in new thinking. I remember way back in the 80s when we were rock climbing, we used to talk about whether we should be using pitons or whether we should be using only chalks and nuts, and it was all about ethics and the grounding of such ethical things. I'm glad we didn't go the other way like many other European nations where they started drilling, bolts and stuff on our rock faces. So there's been some pretty good, stuff that has been happening on the sideline. But I agree that we need to mainstream our thinking, which is what people like Ashok and Rita are sitting in the IMF today. And indeed, when Mr. Vohra was there, I think there was always a focus on the way we climb. But unfortunately, we do need to have a debate because things have kind of got avalanched out in the commercial world, as we call it, in the people's aspirations to climb high and to put a tag on their chest, which is unfortunate. And it's no longer about, I mean, there are climbers who do fantastic climb, but for another day. So let me actually just say to the House that if there are any questions that you would like to pose to any of the panelists, you're welcome to do it on the chat box or on the Q&A section. If not, we will ask internally, perhaps Ashok to step up and respond to some of the stuff that Prerna has actually talked about. And I know that this is conversation that we have at our annual general body meetings, for example. So just from the aspect of, do you feel, Ashok, at the time that we are in a good spot to be able to capture the sort of next, hard climbing and get people to look at alpine, good ethics? And is the IMF doing enough in terms of incentivization or publicity that is more crucial than bringing back an Everest in your bag? So over to you, Ashok.
Okay, firstly, very happy to hear, Prerna talk. And I couldn't agree more with her on a lot of things. Let me just say that, our focus as far as the IMF is concerned is the Indian Himalaya. And in the last 2-3 years, we've sent out so many messages to the mountaineering clubs that please come and climb, try and climb in your own country. Recently, the IMF has just kind of, thrown a challenge called the Himalayan Six Summit Challenge, where we are telling people that why do you have to go and climb, 7 summits across the world and blow up so much of money? Right in your corner, you have the 6, states and the UTs. Come here, pick up the highest mountain and see how much you can go. And absolutely, it is, we all know, and I completely subscribe to that view. It is not what you climb, it is the way you climb. Okay, and that is very, very, it's fundamental. So these changes have to come in. With regard to the Mountain Guide Association, what she's saying, in fact, some of our peers, I've been chasing them up that, look, please come here to the IMF, let's talk and let's get this thing moving. We've already discussed this in the governing council meeting, but, for reasons they best know, that somehow they are not able to, either come together or whatever. But it goes without saying that the IMF is committed to alleviating climbing standards, and we want to encourage young climbers to go and climb on their own steam, without taking external support. You don't have to climb, what do you call a 514 climb, something, the Dawn Wall or something. You pick up a good climber and 3, 4 of you attempt and see where you can go. Of course, it should be compatible to your safety and to your technical capability as to what you can handle. So I completely agree that this is the way forward, and we have to give credence to climbs in India on new routes, on difficult routes, on routes which haven't been climbed or frequented, rather than just going up on a standard thing. The other reason why possibly people go to Nepal is because let's face it, it's commercialized. The climbing there is easy. As Rita brought out, you have a Sherpa to do everything, and you climb actually on his piggy bank. But it is actually here in India where you have to open the route yourself. You have to climb yourself. You have to climb as a complete team where the test comes in. And that is why I'll go back into history and, to Mr. Vohra's time, when mountaineering was an activity, was always done between friends. You look at the great mountaineering partnerships, Bill Tillman and Eric Shipton. You read their classics, how both of them got together and they climbed. So this is an ongoing process. And I repeat, IMF is committed. I remember in last year when Prerna came up to me and she was, planning this ice climbing festival in 2020. She came here to the IMF and she had a word with me, and whatever we could help, the IMF did that, and the IMF is committed to it. So these are issues which we are very well aware of, and we would like this thing to be propagated not only by the IMF but the generation next of the types of Prerna amongst their peers. Come to us, come with a small proposal that okay, 4 of us want to do this peak. The IMF will take on that expedition. The IMF will assist you, guide you, equip you, and see whatever best we can do to help you in achieving that. So the IMF is absolutely committed, and that is, to my mind, the best way forward.
Wonderful. Thanks, Ashok. That was useful insight, and I'm sure the IMF will try and take that torch forward or keep it lit in those thinkings. Could I just quickly circle back, because I know we are almost in the last few minutes of the program, and since we don't have any questions from the audience, although some people have said privately that they'd love to get involved with some of the adventure upgrades or looking at things like the National Academy in Missouri, which is done for civil service training. And I'm sure between us and the IMF, we could help upgrade some of their systems. But just coming very quickly back to Mr. Vohra, and as you probably have to slide into your closing comments again, also, Mr. Vohra, do you think that there is a divide and maybe a need for some of the older mountaineers like yourself? And I mean, I can claim to be in that given the color of my beard, but do we need to have a connectivity with the kind of outlook and the ethics and so on? And do you feel that that could be something that we need to renew or refurbish in the current crop of people that have come, and possibly used mountaineering as a more packaged kind of a experience, rather than what Ashok is saying of opening routes and such like. So it's all about climbing ethics, and it's about standing up for the right values and stuff. So just a quick take on that, Mr. Vohra, before they put up a poster here to close our session.
Well, I think, Mandip, some of these issues which Prerna has raised and Ashok has very correctly commented on them. I would say, because of the paucity of time, that during my time and perhaps before me and after me, there is a school of thought, which I would say label it as the Everest Syndrome. The Everest Syndrome divides the membership of the IMF. If Rita has climbed and I have not climbed, then I'm an OBC, and I don't belong. I think that's created a host of problems in our organizational setup, in our policies. We got smitten by the idea of only Everest. But from time to time, we've had good discussions on the great benefits of alpine climbing. And now more recently, as I mentioned briefly earlier, one great boon which has happened which has come about is our wall climbing, rock climbing, this artificial rock climbing. If in a country of our size, because we lack resources, our schools, our colleges, our institutions, they don't have the resources to send kids for mountaineering training to institutes or other places. But I think if for in every large district we have a couple of climbing walls, every training institute in the country for the police, for the IAS, for the revenue, for there are 32 central services, any kind of training institute for any level of officers, they should be climbing walls. Get people to get the confidence of climbing a vertical surface. Whether they may take to mountain climbing or not is another matter. And then from there, those who have more interest and opportunity, which is always very important, they will find various means of getting to the institutes, learning mountaineering techniques and becoming members of expeditions and going places. But as Ashok mentioned, it's not merely climbing. And it's not also not all the Himalayan circuit and the Everest circuit. Um, as I was telling you, Mandip, in the morning, if you stand at the northern end of Rohtang Pass and look down in the Laul Valley, you see a cluster of Rita, about 100 peaks
Yeah.
of various altitudes.
Yeah.
You from Srinagar to Leh to Kargil, the entire route is full of all kind of interesting peaks in and around Zojila, from the Zojila ridge on to the Yamarnath cave. I had occasion to survey this from the security point of view, because we have several lakh uh, yatris, devotees going and paying homage in the cave. The cave is around, give and take, 14,000. Lack of oxygen and so on. I would say that all in all, not to drag this any further, mountaineering and the role of IMF and subsidiary activities of IMF to sponsor, to encourage, to trigger, to enable, with the help of the Ministry of Youth and Sports and state departments and state institutes, we have a large network and keep on expanding it as the sources come. It will go a long way. The message of the IMF will build up our youth, our character of our youth, the grit, the courage, the bravery, which comes from not climbing 21,000, but climbing a good rock wall. If you get on the top of it in time and not fall, and it gives you that confidence which you can do bigger things in life. So, having said that, Mandip, I would say that if President Ashok and Rita agree, Vice President, one of these days in the coming winter has come in the coming year, we could have a series of good lectures by former climbers, Everesters, and others who are still there, and then the younger blood like Prerna come and tell us what is missing, and some larger debates. But I would say that one day, Ashok, we should definitely have a
Yes.
program where we can have a video recording of Guruji, and he's still there in Chandigarh, and then have our program. I wouldn't expect him to travel in this kind of weather in the road systems and our aviation systems. But we should have a little program to pay homage to the first generation of our MS Kohli is still there. Bull Kumar has gone away, a great climber, a great adventurist, in my perception, and hero of Siachen.
Yes.
Kumar post is still there, yes. And so all in all, once again, Ashok and Rita, to both of you and Mandip, my heartiest congratulations and greetings and good wishes for 60 years of IMF. This is not a small thing, it's a big thing. This institution is apolitical, it has no linkages. It has done great wonders, great good. And we never talk about it, we never publicize it because that is not our agenda. I think as an institution, apex institution, IMF deserves great credit. So great credit to you and compliments to you, Ashok. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Vohra. Thank you, Ashok, Rita, and Prerna. I'm afraid we are completely out of time, even though we've got a few questions coming up. But perhaps we can pen that for the physical discussion, which I'm sure we will have a series taking on from what Mr. Vohra suggested. So with that, I'd like to close the evening and thank the audience and thank all of our wonderful panelists to give us a great insight and reflecting on their own personal journeys. So with that, let's wish each other happy mountains in whichever form and look forward to catching up again. Bye bye all.
Thank you. Thank you.